In the Bible, Paul explains that everyone has two bodies, a physical body and a spiritual body. Mediums use their spiritual bodies when they act as a communication bridge between the physical and spirit worlds. As a spirit speaks, mediums hear the information using the ears of their spiritual bodies, then repeat the information to other physical people. Mediumship is synonymous with the biblical term, gifts of the Spirit. The focus of our show, Making Known the Unknown, is to provide knowledge through the use of Reverend Hewitt's mediumship and Sidney Schwartz's research. The Bible contains the history of psychic events, along with man-made doctrines created by priests centuries ago. This show will explore the untruths which the Bible entrenched into our society. By uncovering these untruths, we encourage people everywhere to think for themselves with a critical mind.
Hello, and welcome to Making Known the Unknown. I'm your host, Tina Tarryk, and this series of shows is called Psychic Phenomena in the Bible. And what we are endeavoring to do is to share with all of our viewers the many different examples in the Bible of psychic phenomena, and that it was happening all the time, all around the people in those days, and in fact it does happen all around people in these days. The only difference is that these days it's not welcomed with open arms, to say the least. Okay, the title of today's show is Are You God-Fearing? Part 2. And of course we will dive into that as well. But first, before we do that, I'd like to introduce my guests. Sidney Schwartz, middle school teacher from Hackensack, New Jersey, and Bible researcher of some 25 plus years. Welcome, Sidney.
Hi, Tina.
And I should say that Sidney's knowledge could challenge, and I will say this, probably any minister, priest, or rabbi who's out there. This man knows quite a lot.
Thank you.
Also, Reverend Carl Hewitt, founder and pastor of Gifts of the Spirit Church right here in Chesterfield, Connecticut, and medium. Welcome, Carl.
Thank you.
And shall I add, a very powerful medium. Okay. Before we jump into the main topic, I always like to throw out a little bit about current events, because during the week, probably like most of you, you look at the news and you see some things pop up and you might have questions, and so I try to put to our guests some of these questions to see what their thoughts are, and perhaps they've researched some of this information as well. And one of the first areas that I wanted to throw out for discussion was the big settlement that happened with the Boston church of some $85 million to the sex abuse victims in that area. And I wanted to kind of just open it up for a quick discussion between Carl and Sidney and see what they thought of that. And I think I'll start with Carl.
It's a drop in the bucket. There's a lot of people that's crossed my path because I'm clairvoyant, and they shared with me over the years, and not one of them have come forward because they're ashamed, and a lot of them don't want to admit it, but it's going to be an avalanche. This is the first wave of many, many waves in that turbulent sea. It's very, very sad, because some of these young men, some of them are really up in their 40s now, and they don't want to shame the family and all of that, but a lot of them are doing some thinking, and they want to get this behind them, and it's not. It's not easy to get behind them, and so as far as I'm concerned, that's a drop in the bucket, what the church is going to have to pay.
Okay. Now, one of the articles that I had read from CNN, from the internet, had mentioned that they had asked for, I think, upwards of $120 million, and then they had realized that, according to this article, they could be in court forever trying to get that exact amount of money. And their thought was in the article that this is the church, and there's only a limited amount of money there for them to access, and they just really didn't want to go through court for the next several years trying to get it so that they reduced it to 85 million. What do you think of that?
Well, they probably, you know, we're just talking about the Boston Archdiocese. You know, this problem is a worldwide problem. I remember seeing a show of John Edwards, who's also a medium, does very similar to work to Carl. And one of the people that, he has lots of people sitting around in a forum, and he comes to them with messages from Spirit. And one Spirit visited this woman. It happened to be a priest, and he begged her forgiveness because he had abused her as a child. And this was in Germany. And she, you know, actually talked about it a little bit. She said she abused almost every child that there wasn't in the whole village. So this has been a problem that's been facing the church for a very, very long time. And the other thing that seems to be very prevalent these days is people have been talking about whether it would be better if the priesthood was not celibate. Well, celibacy, originally, in the beginning church, the priests were married. But because when a priest would die, he would leave his money and whatever he earned to his family. The church didn't like that idea, so they decided to make the priests celibate so that they wouldn't have families, and therefore all the money would remain within the church. And this was the motivation for when that law got established somewhere in the 500s or some point in time when it happened.
Something else that I had also seen on TV with respect to the documents that came out about this case was that the church was not admitting any guilt or fault. This was simply what they called a good faith offering to settle this case. And I found that a little bit disturbing. And I didn't know what you thought about that with respect to maybe the double meaning of good faith.
Well, as far as I'm concerned, from the standpoint of a church and the people that run it, the way I look at it, they're supposed to be the workers of God. Working with God, they're godly people as far as I'm concerned, and I just don't understand why they would not admit this, you know. They're telling the people to admit your sins, what you've done, you know, confession and all of that. Why don't they confess? That's where I'm coming from.
Right.
Why don't they confess?
That's a good point. We do hear a lot about these new websites that list sex offenders in different states, depending on what state you live in. And yet there seems to be a different set of rules for this group of people who committed the same abuses. And I find that a little disturbing as well.
Well, the way I look at it, and from what a friend told me, who is not a priest anymore, he went through a period of hearing voices, seeing visions, and when he started talking about this in his church, word got to his superior, and a letter went to the Vatican, and right away, I mean, he was, they quieted him down, but he couldn't deal with this, and he got to drinking very much and became an alcoholic, and he signed into a hospital, psychiatric hospital, and the person who owns it I know very, very well, and she brought him to see me because he didn't understand any of this. You see, I felt so sorry for the guy. And we went to her place down in Florida, and in order to get away from the people that were there wanting to see me, we got in a little rowboat and rowed out there in the canal in the harbor into a little island, small island, not even as big as this building. There's no houses on it. There were just some trees. And we sat out there 4 hours in this boat. All he did was cry because he had become a medium, hearing voices, seeing visions, and everything else. And he got into that subject that we're talking about here, the abuse, and he just did not know how they could do it. And he said that some of them think that because of the laws of the church, they're safe to be in that. You understand? Yeah. And today he owns a pizza parlor in one of the New England states here, and that is all he does. He won't talk about religion at all. And he said that the last time I talked to him, he said that this was just a drop of the bucket, a drop in the bucket as far as he was concerned. This settlement.
Interesting. Sidney, did you want to share something?
Yes, there's some Bible verses that I've been aware of for a while, but I haven't really discussed this with too many people because it's kind of a little bit controversial. But especially in light of what's been happening, it's in the 11th chapter of the second book of Corinthians, and it says, "For such men are false apostles, deceitful workers, disguising themselves as apostles of Christ. And no wonder, for even Satan disguises himself as an angel of light. Therefore it is not surprising if his servants also disguise themselves as servants of righteousness, whose end shall be according to their deeds." So it's almost, these priests that are so abusive and doing such horrible things, you begin to wonder where they're really coming from. I know we talk about that there is no devil, but there are people who are not positive, and there are people who are kind of evil. And for some reason, these verses seem to, say that they're going to disguise themselves as righteous people, and it describes what's been going on.
Interestingly enough, it would appear that all of this God-given power and authority that these ministers have could invoke fear in someone, especially a young child, so that a child would not go against them because the child has been taught and raised to respect them as leaders in the community and authority figures like their parents.
And then when the child grows up, they keep the same mental attitude, and then the adults also listen to the priest no matter what the priest says, and doesn't question them, and doesn't think for themselves. Yes.
And this to me is where there's a very strong, and I think through almost all of our shows really, that this fear of God or being God-fearing keeps people from thinking for themselves and then allowing themselves to become victims, become abused. And so maybe we'll dive into that a little bit more too throughout the show.
There was one man that came to me, and he was in pretty close to 40, and he said that he was indoctrinated with certain things when he was small by this particular leader. And he was saying that this is a sin, and this is a sin, and this is a sin. All of these stupid things are sins, and that sin is in your body, and you have to get rid of it. And when this man, when he became a young man and he started producing semen, it was told that it's in the semen, but he can't get rid of it himself through masturbation. It has to be done by a man of God.
Really?
And that particular man told me that he was so frightened that it seems like everything that he did as a boy was a sin, and he'd have to go to the priest to get rid of the sin, you see?
My goodness, what type of household was he raised in?
But even if you go to the doctrine of original sin, from that goes back to the story of Adam and Eve, where the serpent just tempted Eve supposedly, and so therefore everybody has this sin. But how does it get transmitted from the parents to the child? It's obviously through sex, and the only way it could be is through the semen. So this all
Right.
continues, and this whole thing about with semen and all, it all goes back to ancient beliefs that used to exist.
It's so sad, it seems, that when children are brought into this world, that they're already brought in with the countdown in terms of being born of original sin,
Sure.
and then having to try to fight and compete and make up for it all the days of their lives so that they won't go to hell, but yet it won't matter because if they're born back again, they're coming in with original sin. So it's sort of like this self-fulfilling prophecy and this illusion of a game we play in this lifetime, but it really has no meaning.
And how many parents were so frightened and distraught if their child should die before they got baptized or erased the original sin, and they
my
go
goodness.
you know, the road to hell is paved with the bones of unbaptized babies. That's what they were told. So we were in France. Remember when we were in France and we were in this cathedral, and there was this big archway, and there was little baby faces and then skulls next to it. It was the strangest thing, all going back to this concept we're talking about.
These were real skulls. They were not artificially made. They were real skulls of babies all the way around that archway.
And they were put there because...
They were put there back there in the time that they said the road to hell is paved with the bones of babies that have not been baptized.
It was in the cathedral in Narbonne, France, which I probably mispronounced because my French is terrible, but it's in southern France. We happened to visit it.
So they killed the children if they weren't baptized? They took them from their homes?
God
Is that what
knows.
happened here?
God knows. I don't know where they
Oh my goodness. I mean, I don't really want to know, but yet I do want to know.
Or maybe they died before they were baptized or whatever.
Very interesting.
Well, I happen to know, but I just don't have the nerve to talk about it on the television. But I do have to add to what I was saying. This gentleman that came to me one time and for a reading and wanted me to help him through this, and he said that he was told by the one that was doing all of this that he could not tell his friends, he could not tell his parents, because if he told another person, the sin would come back 20 times worse than it was, you see? And he could never tell his parents any of this. And so he said that as he looks back now, everything was covered up. I mean, everything was planned.
How horrible.
And then when I went to Brazil, and we went to this city of
Annapolis.
In Annapolis, Brazil, the big city. And I had to relieve myself. And the taxi driver parked right in the mid-city, and there was this old church. And I told him, I said, I really need to go to the men's room. And he stood there, he looked across the street, and it was as if somebody told him, no, go that way. Well, that way was the church. And so he said, follow me. So I followed him. You know, I'm in another country. I follow him. And I followed, he went right up the steps and right into the big church. And there was lots of people in there praying all over the place and everything else. And he right on straight through and up on the altar and in the back. And I kept saying to myself, where is he taking me anyway? And we went back of the altar, and there was a reason that Spirit urged him to take me in there for me to see what I found. Well, he went behind this petition, which is back of the altar, and then he called me and, you know, pointed out. So I went back there, no. Because somebody had come in there with a sledgehammer with a handle about this long. It was a big, heavy sledgehammer. And the urinal, which was right over there, they broke it. It was broken down. All looked like expensive marble. And the wall over here was broken down. So all of this marble was in the floor. And he told me to go there. You know what I mean? Well, I felt very funny, strange having to do this. And I kept, why is he doing this, you know?
Right.
But they wanted me to see it. But there was signs there, and Spirit told me later that this is where a lot of the young men were taken advantage of back here.
You're kidding me. So you're just in a foreign country, you need to go to the bathroom, and then you get this message.
Everywhere I've traveled, all over the world, he knows it because he's traveled with me quite a bit. Nancy knows it. If Spirit wants me to see something, they will lead me there. They will demonstrate it to the highest degree until I learn it, till I know it. And then if I misunderstand it, they explain the whole detail. And whoever this was that came in there with a sledgehammer and did this job, it's like when they got it all done, they threw the hammer on top of it, because the hammer was laying on top of this, and they walked out. It must have been a disgusting job to somebody. Now, the taxi driver, I would say he was around 45. I'm just guessing. And I'll bet you anything that he is very familiar with what went on there. Very familiar. Because he knew where it was. So I asked when I got back here, I asked those that wanted me to know this and see this, I said, did he know? And they gave me a yes on that. He had to know.
Interesting. So Spirit never really cuts you any slack, do they? You're always on and having to be lectured.
It's unreal what they did.
When we went to France, we went to the city of Provence, and that's where Nostradamus lived. And we wanted to go to the cathedral where his bones were buried. So we went there, and I was on the side taking a picture of it, and when I came around, Carl was very disturbed. He said, "Where were you?" I said, "I was taking a picture of the building." He says, "As I walked in towards this building, the doors opened automatically, and there was no electric eye to do that. The Spirit opened the doors. We walked right in. The whole place was under renovations. There was scaffolding, there was things, there was extra lights in the place. And I take my camera out and I'm taking pictures of all sorts of stuff. And eventually I go up to the front altar to take some pictures. There was a statue of Joan of Arc there and stuff. And all of a sudden I felt like someone was boring, like something right behind my head. And I quickly snap my picture and I turn around and Carl's going bonkers because there's this priest there who found us doing this. We weren't supposed to be in there. And on our way out, there was a sign at the desk saying John Dom, which means there was supposed to be a guard there and not let us in. So we got in, the door was open for us, we got in, got our pictures, we got everything we needed and left.
Oh my
and we
goodness.
probably weren't supposed to have done it.
that man was so angry.
Oh, he was
angry. He was taking pictures.
Just like that, the archway that we told you in the other town, I wasn't allowed to take a picture there because there were no pictures allowed.
But you did.
No, I couldn't there. But I
okay.
got the pictures of
Okay.
Nostradamus.
Well, you know what? Maybe in another show too, we can share that with our viewers.
Sure.
To see what they think of that.
Yep.
Very interesting. Wow. I'm going to try to move us right along here into psychic phenomena in the Bible. And the last show we had, we started to touch upon Moses, who was a phenomenal medium.
Yes.
And I also want to make a connection in this show, because we've already touched upon it too, about the influence of children throughout the world, and some things that are going on right here, now, today, that are continuing to influence children, I think, in a really negative way. But I want to turn it over to you first, Sidney, because my understanding, like most people's understandings, I think, is that Jesus was the medium, the prophet, the man, and anybody else is second best. And you are most definitely the expert in that area when it comes to the Bible. So can you give us a kind of a beginning with where Moses stood in terms of Jesus and mediumship and
Sure.
all that good stuff?
Well, Jesus was the most phenomenal medium that was in the Bible. He did every one of the gifts of the Spirit. But Moses probably would be ranked number 2. Moses was there's two different types of mediumship. One is mental mediumship and one is physical mediumship. Mental mediumship is someone who is clairvoyant, sees things, clairaudient, hears things, can prophesy, can go into trance.
Like Carl.
Like Carl.
Okay.
A physical medium is one who can produce physical phenomena. They can levitate things. They can make things move. They can dowse. They can find water. They can do automatic writing. They can do materialization. They can do trumpet work, and a direct voice. So it's a different type of phenomena. Most of it, and the differentiation is that with physical mediumship, physical people can actually see what's going on. You know, like if you go to a reading with Reverend Hewitt, you're not hearing the spirit voice he's hearing. You're just hearing him repeat it. Okay? With a physical mediumship, there's a chance you could hear the spirit voice it yourself. And that's the basic difference. And Moses did more physical phenomena than Jesus did. Even though Jesus did everything, Moses did more of it.
Let me just interrupt you really quickly there. I made a reference to Carl when you talked about mental mediumship.
right.
But with respect to physical mediumship, All of these pictures around us are a representation of that, aren't they?
Yes.
That's through another medium by the name of Hewitt.
Hoyt is a physical medium.
And this would be considered what you talked about as automatic writing or
Precipitated art.
Precipitated art.
There wasn't that much precipitated art done in biblical times, because the gifts of the Spirit, as our technology advances, so does the spirit worlds. So they weren't really doing this that much back then, but where they can now.
All right, thank you.
But so it's not a biblical thing, but this is physical.
Carl?
We knew this medium, Hewitt. We knew him when he was a student. This was in 1985. And he was a student just like the disciples were students of Jesus. And Jesus told them as well as the rest of the world, what you see me do, you can do, even greater things shall you do. Well, he knew that people in the future would be educated, at least some of them, and they would understand the working of spirit, you see? And they'd understand mediumship. And I have a message to the people watching this tape, watching this program, that is this. If you have a little child, your own child or a grandchild, and that little child says to you, I heard a voice, or somebody called out my name, don't tell that kid that that's their imagination, because that child might be able to hear voices that you can't hear. And if you tell them that's their imagination, that could shut them down for the rest of their life, because the cells of the brain in that child, right behind the ears here, they're still, those cells are working, they're running. They're being used 10% of the brain. But if you say that to him or her, and she takes your word for it, then these cells will shut down. That could be a future medium, a gifted person. And it didn't happen to me. I'm very thankful for that. It didn't happen to me. But a lot of strange things happened when I was a kid, the writing on the wall, the voices and all of this. And I was taken, the clergy down there, four different men, 4 different churches, they tried to get these doctors to do a lobotomy on me and put me in an insane asylum for the rest of my life. This is why I quit school and got away from there. I thought they were all lunatics. So there's a lot of children out there that I hear about that are hearing voices, they see visions. There's one case, a wonderful person, her husband just passed away, and the youngest child was visited by him. Because she was told in a reading about 3 years ago, I think it was, that one of her children, the youngest one, could develop to be a medium, and the little child's father is communicating with him already.
You know, what I see is that people have been taught that there's something wrong with this.
Yeah.
To do this, to allow this. But yet, all the examples that we share with people, that you're surrounded in your lives, your life experiences show that having this gift is simply that. It's a gift, like a present that you can give. And nothing bad comes of it. So I really don't get what people are afraid of, and perhaps this would help some of our viewers who are maybe on the border between not being sure about what's going on with their children and remembering some religious dogma that maybe doesn't make any sense. And of course, if there are parents out there as viewers and they might have children who are doing this, and of course you can always remain anonymous. It's not important that we know who you are, but if you have questions about what's going on in your life in that respect, you're always welcome to call the number at the end of the show or the program, and Reverend Hewitt would be more than happy, or you can email our show to respond.
Email it would be better.
Tina, I'd like to reinforce what Reverend Hewitt was just talking about. In chapter 3 of the first book of Samuel, it talks about Samuel's early experiences, and it says, and the boy Samuel was ministering to the Lord before Eli. His mother had given him to the priest because that was to her, she wanted to have a child, and yet she was having trouble conceiving, and that was the deal she made with God. If I have a child, I'll give it to the priest. And the word from the Lord was rare in those days. Visions were infrequent. Apparently there weren't too many mediums around. And it happened that at the time, as Eli was laying down, he was a priest in his place. It was dark, and then Samuel heard a voice, and the Lord called to Samuel, and he said, "I am here." And he ran to Eli and said, "Here I am, for you called me." But Eli said, "I did not call. Lie down again." And he went to lay down. He didn't say, "I didn't call you." You know, he didn't put Samuel down. He told him just to go back to bed. It happened 2 or 3 times before Eli realized that he was hearing the voice of Spirit. And there it told him, "It's the voice of the Lord. It's the voice of Spirit. Listen to what he says and tell me what he's going to say to you." So he was encouraging him, not discouraging him, to continue to hear the voice.
Good. Wow. How many of those do we see in the Bible?
Not often.
And you know, bottom line, really, through a lot of these programs that we do, a lot of what Sidney shares with our viewers, I don't remember hearing these in church.
No, you won't.
All the different churches that I visited, all the different places that I've been, not that I'm that worldly, but they don't talk about this.
No, they don't.
I was invited to Our Lady's house over the west coast of Florida a few years back, and very, very wealthy family. I mean, you should have seen this. It's a palace. And she thought she was an authority of the Bible. I mean, she indicated, and so I didn't question. And so I was talking about the great one, Jesus, giving a peasant woman at the well a reading. And then I explained to her about the peasant woman who was a medium, whose name was Zephaniah, giving the king a reading. You see, that lady, she really lost her cool. She grabbed the Bible out of my hand and turned it over because she thought there was another book inside of a jacket says Bible. And here was a lot of people in this room, and they were all shocked that she did such a thing. And when I caught my breath, I said, you know, if you let me have your Bible, I'll show it to you. And I showed her the same thing. But she was just blown away that it's in there, and how I explained it. It is in there. And this woman, by the way, at the well, and after he had given her all this reading and told her everything that she had done and everything else, she ran, she even left her water pot with him. She ran, she says, come to the well and listen to the prophet. He's told me everything I've ever done. That's a reading.
See, once you understand psychic science and you understand the different gifts and how they work, and then you read the Bible, stuff just comes popping out of the book at you. Because this book is a book of psychic history.
Now, speaking of that, the gifts, I'd like to jump into one of the more famous gifts, as I've been told, and that has to do with Moses and automatic writing. What did he do that was considered automatic writing?
Well, automatic writing is when a spirit would take their hand, place it over a physical person's hand, and guide their writing. And Moses delivered the 10 Commandments. It came through 2 ways. The first way was auditorially. God spoke the 10 Commandments through trumpet mediumship, and then because they didn't have tape recorders in those days, right. Spirit asked Moses to go up to the mountain and carve them into stone, or to write them out, and that was done through automatic writing. Because it basically says in the Bible that the stones were written with the finger of God. I think it was in the 30th. It says, and Moses turned and went down from the mountain, and had 2 stone tablets of testimony were in his hands. The tablets that were written on both sides. On one side and on the other they were written. The tablets were the work of God, and the writing was the writing of God engraved upon the tablets. So it was through, and another verse talks about the finger of God had written these out, and that was the 32nd chapter of Exodus.
You know what's interesting is that people just know the 10 Commandments for the 10 Commandments, and they just take it, you know, at the surface level, and they just go with it. But you
Sometimes.
have explained how it actually was created.
Yes.
And I think having a better understanding of how things are created and where they come from lets you do a little bit more with that.
As a minister, I'm going to say this again.
Okay.
I said this several times on other TV shows. I'll say it again. If God wrote the 10 Commandments, he made a mistake. Why didn't he write the other commandment, number 11, and say, don't go to that guy down at the end of the street. That's the devil. That's my competitor. He said not one single word about the devil, not one. And the Spirit corrected me and told me that he never wrote the 10 Commandments. It was written by man. Oh. Written by man between the year 325 and 386 in that period of time.
Okay. So now we have a little bit of a contradiction here. Mm-hmm. We know that God, usually in the Bible, is referring to spirit, or the Lord is spirit. It's not one big guy sitting up there dictating the rules for people to live by. And Sidney had mentioned that God wrote the 10 Commandments, but we know that it is through spirit with Moses. But then what Carl's saying, and I'm trying to figure out how these two mesh somehow, is that it has been altered, just like the Bible's been altered?
Wait a minute.
Is that what you're saying?
Spirit could have used a physical being on the planet to write the 10 Commandments. That's how they were written.
Oh, okay.
Automatic writing, it's the same
Sure.
thing.
You'd imagine it'd be easier to take some papyrus and a pen with a
Right.
with a, what did they write with in those days? A plumes? And write that down rather than taking a piece of granite and having to carve into it. It would have been a little easier, I suppose.
And in the 19th chapter of Exodus, it talks about how the 10 Commandments were spoken. And in the 18th verse, it says, now Mount Sinai was all in smoke because the Lord had descended upon it in fire. Now that's referring to the ectoplasm. Ectoplasm is a smoky substance that's withdrawn from the cells of the body. And its smoke ascended like the smoke of a furnace, and the whole mountain was quaked violently. And then it reads in this verse, and the sound of the trumpet grew louder and louder, and Moses spoke, and God answered him with thunder. This I'm reading from the New American Standard Bible version, which is, this verse is very inaccurately translated. The real Hebrew says Hakol HaShofar, which is the voice of the trumpet, grew louder and louder, and God answered him with, it says here, with thunder. The Hebrew word is vakol. Vakol can mean thunder, but it can also mean with a voice. What actually was happening here was that the Spirit was speaking through the trumpet and talking to and saying all this. A trumpet looks like this. This is a trumpet that a medium uses, and a medium would go into trance, an ectoplasm would be withdrawn and placed within this megaphone type thing and could speak to the people. So the kol ha-shofar, the voice of the trumpet, is coming from an instrument like this. And Spirit can talk and deliver things, and you would hear it even though you're not clairaudient. I would hear it even though I wasn't clairaudient, because this is physical mediumship. This is one of the physical gifts. And this happened with Moses, in Moses' presence, because he was a physical medium. Also through Joshua, they were both physical mediums. And this is how they heard the voice of the trumpet. And it goes on to say here in verse 18 of chapter 20, and all the people perceived the thunder and the lightnings and the flames and the sound of the trumpet, which is the voice of the trumpet, and the mountain smoking, and they trembled and stood at a distance. And they said to Moses, speak to us yourself and we will listen, but do not let God speak to us lest we die. They were frightened. They couldn't understand how all this was happening, because they didn't really understand. They probably had never seen this type of mediumship before.
Excuse me, this is something I never heard before. I was just hearing it over his voice. Someone here is talking to me, and they said that this, what you were reading there, where as it was fire and thunder on top of the mountain and everything else, they said that down in the valley here, Moses was having a special meeting with the people because there was some talk about where they were going to settle, because everybody wanted to go with him, you see, just like a lot of people want to go with me when I move from the area. Well, as they were having this meeting, the volcano went off, and there was the fire and everything else spewing out of the top of it up there, and the smoke. And they said it just happened at the same time.
It could be.
Oh my goodness!
Had nothing to do with.
Isn't that interesting?
Well, had nothing to do with God.
Okay.
Well, the first time that Carl and I went to Camp Chesterfield, and I experienced trumpet mediumship. The last seance we went to was with Gilbert Burke, who happened to come back and talk to us. preparing a trumpet tape, and he's actually speaking to Carl again. But it was at his seance, and it was a very dark Saturday morning. And as the trumpet was speaking to us, the thunder and lightning was started outside. You could hear the thunder and lightning, and this whole story was going off in my head. These Bible verses were going off in my head because I was hearing the voice of the trumpet, and the thunder and lightning was going on outside, just like I read.
Well, think about how many other people for thousands of years have understood that to mean something entirely different.
Sure.
Rather than something symbolic, it's just simply a natural phenomenon that happened.
Right.
Mother Nature just did what she was normally doing.
Yep.
Interesting. Very interesting.
Well, I tell both of you here about a wonderful, powerful spirit that came to this world. And he said that he was the god of the wind. And we went to a special place in Turkey. You can explain that?
Yeah, we went to a place, it was in Phrygia, which was an ancient civilization. It was outside of the city of Ankara. It was right near King Midas's tomb, because he was the king of the Phrygians. And we were climbing this mountain. I was the first one going up with my video camera going. And I could barely get, on top of this hill, it was like, you could look down into the city of it. It was like an archaeological dig. It was like barbed wire across, so you couldn't go into it, but you could view all the diggings that were going on there, the foundations of these buildings and things. And as we were reaching the top, the wind got so strong that we could barely get to the top. It was a very strange phenomena. But I was later to learn and find documentation that the Fijians revered their mediums. And that to me, this was just a symbolic way of saying hello again, because a medium was returning to the spot.
Wow.
And this particular medium that I'm telling you, I mean, this particular entity that came back using this woman now's body as the medium, he said that he was the god of the wind thousands of years ago. And when we went up to see this city, the wind was just blowing where we were. It was not blowing over there or over there, because our bus was down in the valley here, and the driver, not a bit of wind. And our guide was with us, and he'd never seen anything like it in his life. I mean, we had to practically get down and hold on to this dry grass to hold on to the ground, because we thought we were going to be right up in the
Really?
Yeah, it was excessively strong.
Now, so this is kind of the opposite situation.
Yeah.
Where an entity who would be revered as the god of the wind
But
did this.
at one time in one of the lectures that he did through this medium, that was the part of the world where he lived.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay. That's very interesting. That alone we could dive into for quite a while.
Yep.
And there's another place I went, and we went to the Hawaiian Islands to do some research over there, you know, of the healing temples. And there was one place over there, he was over there taking pictures, and I sat on what was the altar. It was just the base of it here, you know, and there's stones to mark the outer wall of it. And it was a beautiful location. It was on the north shore of that island. And I was sitting there on the altar just viewing the beautiful Pacific and the other islands there, and my hands started bleeding.
Really?
Yeah, it was stigmata. We have pictures of it. It was blood right in the palms of his hands,
So
in the center.
it isn't a jolly life for a medium,
Yeah.
because so many different things happen. And they're constantly trying to get across to me, you know, corrections, just like just a moment
Yeah,
ago.
that's
They
it.
wanted to correct that.
Absolutely.
And just like in the beginning of this show, where we show that sunset, that happened over Corinth, Greece, right? Where Paul said, "I want you to know the gifts of the Spirit,"
Yeah.
and it was the same logo as the church. That's why we use that symbol.
That was a beautiful symbol.
Yeah. So.
Wow. Now, we talked about automatic writing.
Before you go into that,
Okay.
let
All right.
me tell
right.
the viewers something. This is very important for all the viewers out there, wherever these tapes go to. Don't believe all people who say they're mediums, because we're dealing with something that's invisible here, and boy, there's some charlatans that can come out of the woodwork. So I would be very careful. Talk with somebody that's gone to a medium and analyze what they say, Because somebody says they're a medium, that doesn't mean they're a medium. And I've had some students in the past that they were somewhat psychic, but they were not mediums, and they certainly don't have my name on a certificate that they passed the test, because they didn't. I want people to understand the truth about this, because it does leave a door open for unscrupulous people.
So you can actually certify people as legitimate.
It's in the bylaws. It was passed by the Congress,
Okay.
Washington, the state of Connecticut, and it had to go through a priest, rabbi, and a minister. These papers all had to go through their hands, and they all approved them.
Very good.
Even to the way we pray, they approved them. These are in the bylaws.
How about that?
And I was going to call the church a spiritualist church, because I was ordained in a spiritualist church. They said they wouldn't have that. They said it's going to be gifts of the Spirit, just as you find in the Bible. And so from there on, I teach the classes. And like I said before, Sidney was the only one that put a lot of effort into checking up. I think he was checking up on me to make sure I'm right. And he found out that there's a lot of things there that average person does not know. And I never forget that first seance when he came out of that door. He was kicking the dirt. He was kicking the dirt, and I thought he was going to tear up the whole lawn. I said, what in the world is the matter with you? I mean, such a wonderful experience. And he said, those SOBs, those SOBs. And I said, who are you talking about? Who are you swearing? And he says, those priests and those rabbis, he said, they have covered all of this up, covered it up.
That was after the first trumpet seance I ever attended to. And it's like listening to phone conversations with spirit. I mean, it's a very powerful experience.
You know, I keep trying to get back to Moses here, but maybe it's not supposed to happen. I don't know. It's okay. We can go with this.
Moses is not going anywhere. Well, let's get to it.
Talk about. I did want to call attention to it, but I don't think we have the camera to do this today. But you are wearing a Moses holding up the tablets,
Yes.
the Ten Commandments tie.
Right.
And that's pretty unique, Sidney. I just want to tell you that.
Okay.
So for all you savvy fashion people out there, you want a tie like this? Give us a call at the end of the show. I'm sure he'll share his secrets.
Go on eBay.
eBay. There you go. Moses ties on eBay. What else? What's next? Okay. All right. There are other people. I mean, you just made the example again. In the Bible, they use trumpets. You've been to a trumpet seance, which is in a camp not very far from here.
Right.
So again, a connection. Then, now. No problems then, people freak out now. The imbalance here, religion. Right? If we had to put an equation out there, the religion skewed it, twisted it, turned it.
And they wanted to make the people afraid of this work.
God-fearing.
God-fearing,
There you
exactly.
go. There's big business in being God-fearing too, huh?
Yeah.
Interesting.
You know, it's interesting. A few days ago, I came across some information that I'd like to share.
Okay.
Once I get it up on the computer. I was looking up for a specific word for one of the books I was writing, and as I was there, they used the word demon in the definition, and since I was in this dictionary that was dealing with the paranormal and parapsychology, I said, I wonder what their definition of a demon is anyhow. And I looked it up, and it says that a demon is from the Greek word daemon, and it was first used as a demigod, a spirit ranking between gods and men, including the spirits of the dead Greek heroes. It turned out that a demon was a positive spirit. It was not an evil spirit as we thought, but it was a positive spirit. It was they were looked at spirits that would hand out fate. They were almost like the gods. The Greek gods were called demons, and it wasn't until the late Latin period, which was between 180 and 600, that the word got changed into an evil spirit. So it used to be a good spirit. In fact, the original book I said just called it a genius. And as we've tried to explain before, the ascended masters have such fantastic knowledge. They would be considered geniuses for us. So as genius spirit, to me, was an ascended master.
Right.
So here you have this Greek word demon, which is talking about ascended masters and giving enlightenment to the world.
Right.
And yet we think of it as an evil being. Because what happened was, as far as I can tell, Jerome, who was changing all this work and trying to get mediumship, he was successful in getting mediumship out of the church in the late 300s and early 400s, was the one who changed this, because late Latin is right in his time frame, and he turned this into an evil spirit instead of an enlightening one. And then they went in and they changed what was in the Bible, and because this is in the book of Ephesians, chapter 2, verse 1. And you were dead in your trespasses and sins, in which you formerly walked according to the course of the world, according to the prince of power of the air, of the spirit that is now working in the sons of disobedience. So what they're saying is that there's these spirits that are in the air, in the ether ways that you can't see, and they're going to make you be sinful or disobeying. And in the 6th chapter of Ephesians, says, for our struggle is not against flesh and blood, which means humans, but against the rulers, against the powers, against the world of forces of this darkness, against the spiritual forces of wickedness in the heavenly places. So they're saying these evil things are in heaven. I thought God was supposed to be in heaven, and the angels. But all these kind of verses that were put into the Bible were to make people afraid of anything that they couldn't see. So if a voice came to them, and the other verse I read before, that you weren't sure if it was an angel or Satan,
right.
So if you hear a voice, okay, it could be Satan, and he's out to get you. So therefore, shut it down, send him out, just like I met one of Carl's cousins, and she was born up a Baptist, and she heard voices just like Carl did, but she didn't want to. And she said she prayed with her father to have the voices not speak to her anymore. And they told her that they would obey her, but if she ever wanted to hear them again, just to ask. Well, she's never asked, because she believes all this stuff in the Bible. She believes in these evil demons. So instead of listening to ascended masters, she thinks they're evil, afraid of them, and has nothing to do with them. She's shut her brain down. And this is what we're trying to do in this show, is to get people not to be afraid and to open their minds to the spirit people, not to shut them down.
So what sounds like is happening here is that someone at some point in time took this Greek word, translated it into something Latin.
Right.
So we're going 2 different cultures, 2 different languages, and guess what? If there isn't a word or a meaning that transfers through, like the Eskimos have how many words for snow? We have 1.
Right.
Something's lost.
Yes.
And in
Either
fact,
that or
you're showing that it's not only that's lost, but it's coming out completely different.
Yes. It's coming out the way they wanted it to come out. And anyone has told us so many times that the Bible has been altered to fit the theology that was created at the time, to make it fit. And it's been twisted and turned a lot. And this is one example where they took an ascended master and turned him into an evil spirit.
When we talk about Bibles being changed, well, you just shared with me recently that you've discovered how many more Bibles?
Yeah, there's another 50 Bibles. I haven't looked at it.
So a total now of how many Bibles out there?
Well, there's at least 300 Bibles out there.
300 Bibles.
Yes.
You know what? I think by the time you're done, you're going to find a different Bible for every one of the 12,000 religions on the planet.
Just about.
And then what does that mean?
Yeah.
It's like everyone having their own diary, their own personal little story.
Yep.
Well, that's fine for them, but my goodness, the damage that's come out of this.
We got time. I want to tell the world.
Okay.
Assuming that this may be seen all over the world, I don't know.
I would like that.
I would like that too. They told me just something this week. This is heavy stuff. They said that this planet that we live on here, that we call the Earth, they called it Tarryk a long time ago. It's on the fringe edges of the Milky Way, and in the Milky Way itself, there's about 10 billion, I made them repeat that, billion suns. I almost said stars, suns. And they said this is not the only planet that inhabits human beings. They said this is the only one that they're all afraid of. They've been watching us, they've been coming here, but they will not show themselves. I'm talking about other planetary people, very advanced, using all of their brain. They do not burn fossil fuel in their aeroships, they fly on a beam of light. And I remember in 1991, was it the Desert
Storm.
Desert
War?
Storm, right.
I remember so well, the Spirit told me to watch the news that night, and I did, and they showed a new invention here, the Air Force, and as they were flying over, he caught the picture of this, the view of this hangar that I think that Saddam owned or something like that.
Okay.
And the computer beamed in on just a small door of it. And when the computer did that and the guy pressed the button, and that laser light went right to that door, the bomb followed the laser light.
Right,
and they told me that was the same system that these other planetary systems use, as they fly on a highway of light. But they said here, the governments do not want people to know this because nobody's going to make any money if you fly on a beam of light. You see? And they said that this planet of ours would be considered like years ago, every city had a dump, that this whole planet is a dump. And they said that because we have so many wars and bombs and killings and all of this, they do not have bombs. And this is why they have been trying to show themselves to us. And the government already knows this. And many of these things that you've heard about flying saucers and stuff, it's all true, but they've covered it up.
Well, in the news this past week, and I wasn't sure we were going to talk about this today, but we only have a few minutes left and I'll throw it in. I forget which show I was watching at night. They've discovered more faces on Mars. Know whether they really are faces or not, or there's a message there or not, like the crop circles that you've shared. They're showing more of these, what appear to be faces, and these phenomenal tubes all over the surface, but yet they're underground. And I said, you know, I've got to ask what that's about, and maybe Carl knows.
Okay. If you go down to Peru, if you're way up in the air, you go down to Peru and you look down, you will see these forms on the top of the mountains. Those were landing fields, thousands of years ago. The things that they're seeing on Mars now are landing fields.
Landing fields.
They connected me. They compared the two.
Really?
It goes way back, thousands of years ago. We think we're so modern today. No way.
So there are entities living on Mars.
I'm not sure they're living there now because Mars, everything changed, and it's, from my understanding, it all burned away.
Oh, really?
I don't know why.
Okay.
Maybe that's why they call it the Red Planet.
Very interesting.
But that particular time that I spent with those entities talking about it, that dialogue was not very long, so I didn't get into that.
Yeah, yeah. Very interesting. Okay.
I usually get blown away when they tell me this heavy stuff, and then whatever they got to say later, I don't get it.
You certainly have enough to study, to listen to. We just have a few more minutes left in the show, and we're going to continue this series, I think, of God-fearing, because there's so much yet to cover, so much ground to cover. And I want to remind our viewers that if you are interested in this book that Reverend Hewitt and Sidney Schwartz has, where the research is going to be going in the not-so-distant future, because another book's about ready to hit the market. And I just want to say thank you to Sidney and Carl.
Thank you.
And thank you to our viewers for taking the chance to open up your minds and watch this show. You never know what you might learn. And
Making known the unknown.
absolutely. Until next time, thank you and be well.